The fortress of Vorak did not rise. It sank. Built into the black rock of Elar's spine, it spread beneath the surface like rot. A labyrinth of iron, smoke, and silence. No windows, no open air. Only thick walls and thicker secrets. Jalen Reese stood before the gates, dust clinging to his boots, cloak heavy with heat and ash. Behind him, a girl walked slowly. Thin, shackled, barefoot, skin the color of pale sky at midnight, hair matted, eyes too quiet for someone so young. The guards laughed when they saw her. "That's what he brings?" one scoffed, armor creaking. "A child?" Jalen said nothing. He reached into his coat and produced a black shard, the token. The guard stepped forward, scanned it, and paled. No more words, just a quick nod. The gates opened. Inside, the air grew colder. They walked through halls lit by pulse-fire sconces, past statues shaped like twisted bone, past men who never blinked, and women who never smiled. All eyes followed the girl. Not with pity, with hunger. Jalen led her to the center chamber. There, beneath a throne carved from the rib of a planetary beast, sat Vorak. Larger than legend. His skin stitched with gold wire, his mouth covered by a mask that breathed smoke and light. When he stood, the floor cracked. "So," he rumbled, voice like stone dragged through metal, "you brought me something rare." Jalen gave a short bow. Pure stock, no implants, no psychic breaks, unmapped genome, unspoken dialect. Vorak circled the girl. She did not look up. She did not flinch. He tapped her forehead with a gloved claw. No spark. "She was bred to suppress," Jalen replied. "Makes her safe. Until you want her not to be." Vorak laughed. The sound echoed like weapons drawn in a church. "You want payment?" Jalen nodded. Vorak gestured. A servant approached, pale, eyeless, holding a box no larger than a heart. It opened. Inside sat a shard of something wrong. It pulsed faintly. Not with light, with memory. Bone light. Older than any language. Older than war. Older, some whispered, than time. Jalen's gaze didn't break. He took the box. Vorak waved his hand. Guards approached the girl. "This one will be fun," Vorak muttered. "So much emptiness to fill." The girl looked up. Only once. Eyes silver. For a second, too fast to name, the bone light flickered in Jalen's hands. And so did she. Jalen turned and walked away. But he didn't smile. Didn't breathe easy. Because he had seen the flicker. And he remembered the words. "When she sees it again, the stars will know her name." And beneath the fortress, where no one listened, something ancient began to stir. The door sealed behind her with a hiss, like breath held too long. Kalia stood alone in the dark. The cell was carved from mineral composite, reinforced with pulse-dampening foam, designed to mute both sound and thought. No windows, no warmth, only a blinking red dot above her head and the cold drip of recycled air. She had been here before. Not this cell, but 1,000 like it. Her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. Still, she did not cry. She sat cross-legged on the floor, hands folded in her lap, her breath steady even as her wrists still bore the faint indentations of the shackles that had just been removed. It was quiet, but not empty. There was a hum beneath the walls. Not a machine, not a voice, something deeper. A memory trying to return. She placed one palm against the floor. The stone beneath her felt warmer than it should. Her fingers twitched, and then she heard it. A whisper, not in words, in recognition. "You were made for this." Her breath caught. She pulled her hand back, eyes wide. The lights overhead flickered. Across the fortress, unnoticed by most, small systems blinked. Backups failed to run. Locks hesitated for half a second before resuming. In the central command deck, a junior technician frowned. "Sir, we're getting phantom fluctuations on the inner ring." "Ghost code?" Could be, but the pattern's not random, it's rhythmic, like breathing. In his private quarters, Jalen Reese stood before the bone light. It pulsed faintly inside its containment box. And then, just once, it dimmed. Jalen stared. She felt it, he whispered. Behind him, the door opened. An old steward, draped in shadow silks, entered. The girl is contained. For now, Jalen replied. She's just a carrier. No, he said. She's remembering. Back in the cell, Kalea stood, her bare feet pressed against the floor. She raised one hand, palm facing the far wall. Nothing happened. She closed her eyes. Feel. Not power, not rage, not escape, just memory. What it felt like to hold a flame. What it meant to be more than what they said she was. Light shimmered around her fingers. Software, pale, alive. The red light above her blinked rapidly. In the security hub, sirens lit up. Inmate 0 is spiking, one guard yelled. Level 4 surge. Bioenergy is climbing beyond tolerance. Another guard ran to the override console. Do we neutralize? But before they could act, all power went out. Across the fortress, lights died. Doors locked, screens cracked. And inside the heart of the fortress, in a cell built to contain forgotten gods, the girl who had been given away like nothing woke up. She opened her eyes. They glowed. Not with fury, with memory. And across the galaxy, in systems built on lies, a ripple began. The fortress didn't groan, it breathed. Somewhere deep in the central core, past the surveillance grids and silent guard halls, circuits that had remained dormant for centuries flared awake. Not from a command, not from damage, from recognition. Kalea walked the corridor barefoot, the lights flickering with every step she took. Her skin glowed softly now, like frost refracting sunlight. Her hair floated gently around her shoulders, caught in an invisible field that moved with her. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked as if the stone remembered her feet. Behind her, the door to her cell lay open, broken clean down the middle without force, just peeled away like an old wound finally exhaled. Security systems had tried to lock her in. They no longer existed. From hidden panels, thin metallic drones tracked her progress in silence. They should have raised alarms, activated turrets, engaged neural scramblers. Instead, they paused, hovered, and one by one, they bowed. In the command chamber, chaos bloomed. Security is collapsing across grid sectors 14 through 19, barked a technician, voice sharp with disbelief. Containment failsafes are offline. Nothing is responding. Vorak stood at the center of the control tower, unmoving. His eyes locked on a monitor showing Kalea's slow, deliberate advance. He did not speak. He did not rage. He simply watched. Jalen stood beside him, arms folded, expression unreadable. Vorak growled low. You said she was dormant. I said she was forgotten. That's not the same thing. The warlord turned, eyes burning. What is she? Jalen looked him dead in the eye. Older than your throne. Elsewhere, Kalea stepped into a chamber long buried beneath layers of synthetic shielding. The air changed the moment she entered, no longer stale, no longer dry. It smelled like rain on ash, like something sacred remembered. At the center of the room stood a column of crystal, fractured at the top, humming softly. She raised a hand, and the crystal responded. Not with light, with voice. Thousands of them, layered, overlapping, echoes of pain, joy, love, loss, memories, Heron. Not just from this life, from before. The lights above pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She stepped forward, placed her palm against the crystal, and sank inward. Not her body, her mind. She saw cities floating in red skies, children born of starlight, the first forging of bone light by hands not yet called human, the great silence, the memory purge. Her mother's face as she whispered, "They will not remember. But you must." She gasped. Eyes wide, the chamber shimmered, then changed. The walls reformed into smooth obsidian. Symbols appeared, no longer warnings but welcomes. The drones around her lit with golden pulses. They were not machines. They were records, and they had been waiting for her. Kalea looked at her own hands. The glow beneath her skin was no longer just light. It was language. The words of a people erased, etched into the bones of the last who still carried them. Her lips parted. And in the language none had spoken for 10,000 years, she whispered, "I remember." And across the fortress, everything stopped. Even the bone light. Even Vorak. Even time itself. The fortress no longer obeyed Vorak. It pulsed. Stone walls once loyal to silence now sang in tones no ear could fully hear. Vibrations that stirred cables in their sockets, made data streams flicker like candlelight, and turned metal into echo chambers for something far older than code. Kalea walked at the center of it all. The bone light chamber had opened for her, not with force, not with access codes, but like a pupil widening in recognition of light. Its petals of crystal unfurled in silence, revealing the ancient core. Not a weapon, not an engine, a memory. Suspended in the heart of the room, it hovered in place, flickering with ghost light. She stepped toward it slowly. Each footfall sent waves through the air, bending it gently like heat haze. The drones that had once patrolled this corridor now lined the walls, silent and reverent. Kalea reached the dais, placed both palms on the bone light. The room breathed. Across the fortress, lights dimmed, then surged. Weapons locked in vaults powered down without trigger. Surveillance arrays blinked, and when they reopened, did not watch, but witnessed. Commanders in distant wings shouted for answers. Engineers cried that their tools had turned against them. Walls shifted, floors retracted. Doors once sealed to protect secrets now opened inward like an offering. Vorak watched it all from the central tower, his fingers clawing at the edge of the console. "She's rewriting it," a guard stammered. "No," Jalen said softly, never looking away. "She's reminding it." Inside the chamber, Kalea stood unmoving. But within her, the tide crashed. She saw flashes not only of the bone light's past, but of her own. Not the girl in chains, not the silent body traded for a shard, but the first time she ever touched the light. Not here, not now, but as a child. Hidden. Carried by her mother to a place like this, smaller, older, safer, and taught the word for light not as something to fear, but something to become. Now she was becoming it. The bone light responded, tendrils of golden script crawling up her arms, into her veins, lighting her from within. When she opened her eyes again, the chamber was glowing. Her voice rang clear. "I remember my name." The fortress shuddered. Not in fear, in recognition. Every wall whispered it back, in 1,000 forgotten dialects. Kalea, Kalea, Kalea. Above, the command tower dimmed as Vorak slammed his fist into the control table. "I want her dead." The system did not respond. The screen showed only one symbol now, an eye, open, and weeping light. Jalen stepped away from the console and walked toward the lift. "You won't reach her now," he said without turning. Vorak snarled. "You betrayed me." "No," Jalen said. "I used you. You were the key to put her where she needed to be." He paused at the door. "And now you're obsolete." As the lift descended, the command deck's lights blacked out one by one. Back in the chamber, Kalea stood alone with the bone light fully active around her. It did not speak. It did not pulse. It listened. Because she was not commanding it, she was completing it. Outside the chamber, warriors who had drawn weapons now lowered them. Some knelt, others cried. One simply dropped to the floor and whispered, "We were never meant to forget this." Kalea looked to the sky through the dome above and said, "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to wake what you buried." And the fortress shifted once more. Into truth. The lift rose through the bones of the fortress like a breath rising in a dying beast. The air above was heavy now, not with heat, not with smoke, but with something far older than fear. Memory. Jalen Reese stepped off the platform into the grand conflux, where shadows once bowed to Vorak and judgment was dealt by flame. Now those flames were dim. The walls trembled with every heartbeat coming from below. Kalea was no longer hiding, and neither was what she carried. Vorak stood waiting, blade drawn. Not ceremonial, personal. The edge glowed red with heat, runes etched along the hilt. Each one a name taken, a life claimed. Armor coiled around his shoulders like plated muscle, reinforced by every war he thought he had won. She was nothing, he said, without looking at Jalen. Jalen didn't answer. Vorak turned, mask retracted. His face, all muscle and scarring, twisted with rage that had nowhere to go. You gave her to me. You brought her into my house. I brought the light, Jalen said. You brought the end, Vorak hissed. Jalen stepped closer. I brought you your mirror. And you didn't like what you saw. The chamber shook again. From the open skylight above, pale gold light poured in, trailing in veins through the marble, up the walls, across the banners that once bore Vorak's symbol. Now those symbols peeled away, faded, erased. Vorak roared and lunged. Jalen didn't move. The sword came down, screaming through the air, and stopped, inches from his face, frozen, not by shield, not by tech, by presence. Kalea stood behind Vorak now. No footsteps, no breath. She was simply there. Her hand raised, her palm glowing. The sword in Vorak's hand turned to dust, falling like ash onto the floor. Vorak stumbled back. No, he gasped. You're just a carrier, a tool. You were made. I was chosen, Kalea said. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the room like water rising in a sealed chamber. You took from me my name, my mother, my language, and still, I returned. She stepped forward. Vorak tried to back away, but the light pinned him in place. Kalea looked at him, not with hate, with clarity. You are not worth my anger. Vorak's lips trembled. What are you going to do to me? She raised her hand once more. I am going to forget you. He vanished, not in flame, not in violence, but in silence, as if he had never been spoken into being. His throne remained empty. His echo never came. The chamber pulsed once, like an old wound finally sealed. And then, peace. Jalen exhaled for the first time in hours. Kalea turned to him. Her eyes were tired, her light dimmer, but she smiled. I didn't destroy him. No, Jalen said. You erased what made him real. Kalea walked to the center of the room, where the bone light's projection now hovered above, spinning like a star reborn. She reached for it, and the fortress bowed one last time. The fortress breathed its first quiet breath in centuries. Walls that had known only orders and screams now hummed gently, pulsing in harmony with Kalea's heartbeat. She stood at the center of the grand conflux, the bone light hovering softly before her, not blazing, just glowing like an ember of thought. Jalen watched her carefully. He had planned for this moment, but even he wasn't prepared for what was happening now. The bone light drifted toward Kalea. She did not move, did not reach, only waited, her palms open, her eyes closed. When it touched her chest, there was no impact. It simply passed through her skin, as softly as water through sand, disappearing within. She gasped once, a small sound of surprise, then stood completely still. Around her, symbols formed on her skin, glowing softly, tracing patterns older than written words. The language of stars, of memory, of truth forgotten and then returned. They thought it was a weapon, she whispered. Her voice echoed gently around the room, carried by walls that had learned to listen. Jalen stepped closer. What is it, really? She opened her eyes. It's an answer. To what? To what happened before. To why the stars forgot. To why they feared this day. The chamber rippled around them. Projections flickered into view, filling the room. Planets, star maps, worlds long destroyed, worlds waiting to be found. It was a map unlike any they had ever seen, marked by points of gentle golden light. Each point, a memory lost. Each light, a life forgotten. "It's showing us everything they tried to erase," Jalen whispered. "No," Kalia said softly. "It's showing us everything they knew would someday return." She raised one hand, and the projections shifted, focusing onto one far edge of the map, a space beyond the rim. Empty, dark, moving closer. "What's that?" Jalen asked, his voice tight. Kalea's expression hardened. "The hunger. What my mother warned me about. What they tried to hide." "Can it be stopped?" She met his eyes. "Not by weapons, not by armies." "Then by what?" She touched the symbols on her arm gently. "By remembering." Jalen stepped back, breath catching. "So that's why they locked you away?" "Yes," she said. "Because memory is more dangerous than war. And they feared what would happen if the galaxy remembered itself." She turned to him fully, the light within her chest pulsing like a heartbeat of ancient stars. "Now we will remind them." Around them, the fortress, once a cage, now opened its gates fully, lights glowing warmly, systems welcoming the change. Screens broadcasted messages across networks long disconnected. Forgotten frequencies waking with whispers of the past. Kalea stood tall, her hair floating gently around her, symbols shifting on her skin, eyes calm with clarity. "We are not the first," she said, "but now we will be the last to forget." And in the quiet of that room, Jalen finally understood. He had not brought her here to free her. He had brought her here to free everyone else. Beyond the edge of known space, in the silent void between galaxies, something stirred. It was neither living nor dead, neither hungry nor full. It simply existed, drawn slowly forward by signals older than worlds. They called it the Eater, though it had no mouth. They feared it, though it had no form. It moved through darkness, a presence ancient and hollow, devouring memory and thought, leaving only silence. It was coming. The fortress hummed gently, now transformed from a place of cruelty into a beacon. Kalia stood on the outer balcony, hands resting on the railing, the bone light still softly pulsing within her chest. Her silver eyes scanned the stars, calm and focused, sensing the approach of something she knew would inevitably arrive. Jalen stepped quietly behind her. "It's close, isn't it?" She nodded without turning. "Very." "We have no weapons powerful enough," he murmured, tension edging his voice. "I don't intend to fight it," she replied softly. He frowned, stepping forward to face her. "Then what do we do?" She turned slowly, her face serene yet resolute. "We remind it of what it is." From the void, sensors screamed alerts. Something massive, intangible yet undeniable, approaching rapidly. The Eater pressed forward, driven by an endless hunger for memories, for lives, for worlds. The fortress began to pulse louder, not with alarms but with anticipation. Kalia lifted her hands. The glow from within expanded outward, threading through the fortress walls, amplifying into streams of golden light. Her presence resonated, illuminating every corridor, every crevice, every forgotten room. At the boundary of the fortress's defense shield, space rippled and distorted. Darkness condensed, forming something that wasn't quite a shape, but more an absence where form should be. The Eater hovered, vast and endless, radiating emptiness. Kalea moved toward it, stepping off the balcony into the air, golden threads of memory beneath her feet, guiding her forward effortlessly. The Eater sensed her and turned its attention, the void intensifying. She stopped directly before it, suspended in space. "You don't remember yourself," she spoke, her voice clear and unafraid, echoing not just through space but through the fabric of thought itself. The darkness hesitated. It had never heard words, never been addressed, only fled from or attacked. Curiosity sparked within its vast emptiness. "You were not created to consume," Kalea continued gently, "but to preserve. You once held memories too precious for worlds to carry alone." The Eater's vast emptiness trembled, a shudder rippling through space itself. Tendrils of darkness stretched toward her, not in aggression, but in confusion. She reached out a hand, and golden light flowed outward, gently wrapping around the eater's darkness. "Remember," she whispered softly. In that instant, the void ceased expanding. Within the eater, flashes of long-forgotten images sparked. Laughter, joy, sorrow, triumphs and tragedies, countless civilizations preserved within the depths of its forgotten heart. It shook violently, overwhelmed by sensations it had long erased from itself. Kalea's voice became firmer, carrying authority and compassion. "You were built to hold the truth of our past, not erase it." The fortress pulsed brighter, resonating with her words. Memories flowed like rivers from Kalea to the creature, filling the void, illuminating the shadow. The eater shrank back, not in fear but in astonishment, its purpose rekindled. Slowly, darkness gave way to soft starlight. The eater reformed, reshaped by the memories it once protected. Its intangible form shimmered gently now, no longer an emptiness but a tapestry of lost worlds and forgotten voices, glowing softly with reclaimed purpose. As Kalea drew back, returning slowly toward the fortress balcony, Jalen stared in silent awe. The eater retreated, carrying its reclaimed memories into the void from which it came. Not as a predator, but as a guardian, tasked once more to protect rather than consume. Jalen reached out as Kalea landed softly beside him. "You didn't defeat it," he said in wonder. "You saved it." She smiled gently, weary but fulfilled. "No," she corrected, touching her chest where the bone light still pulsed softly. "We saved each other." From atop the fortress, Kalea gazed across a galaxy waking from a long sleep. Below, where darkness had once reigned, streams of gentle light now flowed steadily, illuminating worlds that had forgotten hope. She stood at the edge of the platform, the cosmos spread out before her, endless and breathing. Beside her, Jalen watched quietly, noticing how the stars seemed brighter now, like witnesses to a promise fulfilled. Kalea touched her chest, feeling the bone light within her pulse in rhythm with her heart. It was no longer an artifact, just part of her, woven seamlessly into the fabric of her being. She turned her gaze to Jalen. "This was never just about us." He nodded, understanding fully for the first time. "We woke something much bigger." "No," she said gently. "We reminded it." The galaxy has always known who it is. It just needed permission to remember. Far below them, across thousands of worlds, people looked upward, sensing the shift without fully knowing its source. Old fears dissolved, ancient wounds began to close, and memories once sealed away returned like rain to parched soil. Kalea stepped forward, raising one hand toward the endless stars. "I'm not a slave," she said, her voice soft yet resonant. "I am a mirror. And in this reflection, you will all see who you truly are." Her words traveled beyond the fortress, carried by ancient networks reactivated by her awakening. They whispered through sleeping cities, echoed across deserts of ash, flowed through chambers of power and halls of forgotten kings. Slowly, gently, the galaxy heard her and remembered. The great machines, once silent, hummed back to life with purpose, not war. Ancient archives reopened, sharing truths long hidden. Forgotten worlds emerged from isolation, embracing their stories rather than fearing them. And on 1,000 planets, in countless languages, one phrase was spoken in awe-filled whispers. "The starborn has returned." Kalea lowered her hand, the glow around her fading to a gentle pulse. She turned toward Jalen, her eyes bright with clarity, a peaceful strength radiating from her like starlight. Jalen reached out, taking her hand. "It's only just begun, hasn't it?" She smiled, her expression serene, knowing. It never ended. We were always meant to wake here, together. They stood quietly for a long moment, the galaxy breathing around them, no longer silent, no longer afraid. Because somewhere out there, among billions of souls, a child looked up at the stars and smiled, feeling something unfamiliar yet comforting. Hope. And that child whispered softly, "I remember." Have you ever felt a truth so powerful it changed everything around you? Would you have the courage, like Kalea, to become a mirror that reflects the galaxy's forgotten memories? Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Kalea simply return home? Or did she remind us all what home really means?